Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're putting on our detective hats to decode the absolute bedrock, the fascinating ancestor of our modern language, Old English. Now, it's a language that feels entirely foreign to look at, yet it's literally hiding in plain sight every single time we open our mouths.
Let's just dive right in with an actual quote from the famous epic poem Beowulf. This is actually the most famous surviving piece of literature written in Old English. Okay, the original text reads, Kom on wanre nicht, skriden shadowginga. Wild, right? In modern English, that directly translates to, in the dark night he came, creeping, the shadow-goer.
Seeing that text, you're probably asking yourself, does this look like the English I speak? How on earth could this completely alien-looking language possibly be the exact same English we use today? I mean, if you tried to read it without a translation, it'd be pretty much gibberish to us now. But believe it or not, there is a continuous, if maybe a little shaky, line of development connecting that ancient text right down to the words you and I are using right now.
So to solve this mystery, we're going to trace the entire life cycle of Old English. We'll be looking at, number 1, the origins of Old English. Number 2, the Germanic language family. 3, grammar and sentence structure. 4, decoding the lost alphabet. 5, the fall of Old English. And finally, number 6, words we still use today.
All right, section 1, the origins of Old English. So where and when did this all start? Well, Old English began its life around the year 450 AD. It eventually flourished into full literacy, with the first written text popping up around 700 AD. And then it ended actually quite abruptly over 600 years later with the Norman conquest in 1066 AD. But here's the crazy part. Old English wasn't actually native to Britain. It was totally imported. Back in the mid-5th century, these Germanic tribes, the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, left continental Europe and settled in Britain. The dialects these settlers brought with them sort of mashed together and evolved into what we now call Old English. It spread over most of present-day England and even parts of southern and eastern Scotland. And as these Germanic settlers really took over, their new language completely wiped out and replaced the local Roman Celtic languages, like Common Brittonic and Latin, that were already being spoken there. Moving on to section 2, the Germanic language family.
To really get Old English, we have to look at its closest linguistic cousins. This comparison here perfectly proves that Old English is fundamentally a Germanic language. Just look at the breakdown. English shares some seriously deep, undeniable roots with Dutch and German. The word father is vader in Dutch and vater in German. Foot is voet and voes. See the pattern? They all stem from a common reconstructed ancestor we call Proto-Germanic. Now, on the flip side, look at Romance languages like French, which come from Latin. They look totally different. Where we have an F for father, French has a P for père. Honestly, the Anglo-Saxons called their language English, and if you could hop in a time machine back to the 5th century, it wouldn't have sounded all that different from the dialects spoken over on the European mainland.
Which brings us to section 3, grammar and sentence structure. But you know, the similarities to German don't just stop at vocabulary. They go way deep into how the language was actually built. Today, modern English relies on a super rigid word order, subject, then verb, then object, like the dog bit the man. But Old English? It was a heavily inflected language. That means it relied on physically changing the endings of words to show what they were doing in a sentence, rather than just relying on where they were placed. Because those word endings were doing all the heavy lifting, Old English sentences were incredibly fluid. You could do subject-verb-object just like we do today, but you could also totally use subject-object-verb, which is a pattern you still see in modern German or Latin. And oh man, the grammatical complexity goes even deeper than that. Surprisingly, just like modern German or Icelandic, Old English assigned arbitrary grammatical genders to literally all nouns, masculine, feminine, or neuter. And get this, it often had absolutely nothing to do with natural sex. For example, the Old English word wefman, which literally translates to woman, was grammatically masculine. No way, right? This entire system of grammatical gender has completely vanished from modern English, which is a huge reason why the old version feels so utterly foreign to us now.
Let's check out section 4, decoding the lost alphabet.
So let's solve the mystery of why Old English looks so visually bizarre on the page. The earliest Old English wasn't written with the letters you and I use today. The early Anglo-Saxons actually used a runic alphabet called the Futhorc. This was basically designed with straight lines for carving inscriptions into hard stuff like wood, bone, and stone. Think weapons or amulets. But then, around the 7th century, Christian missionaries arrived and introduced the Latin script. And instead of the Latin alphabet just completely replacing the runes, the two systems actually blended together. Monks essentially modify the Latin alphabet by pulling in runic symbols for sounds that Latin just didn't have equivalents for.
This wild mashup gave Old English 5 distinct lost letters that you definitely won't find on your smartphone keyboard today. First, we have thorn and F, both of which represented the sus sound, like in this or that. Then there's win, a rune that looked kind of like a P but made a wah sound. Yog looked like a curly 3 and made this throaty gus sound. And finally, ash, which was basically a mashup of A and E that made a short ass sound, like in cat. Obviously, over the centuries, these were eventually dropped from our 26-letter alphabet and just replaced with combinations like TH or W.
Now, understanding these lost letters actually clears up one of the most famous linguistic myths out there. Next time you see a sign for Ye Old Tavern, just know that nobody, and I mean nobody, ever walked around saying ye. Here's what happened. Early printing presses, which were usually imported from Europe, simply didn't carry the runic letter thorn. So what did printers do? They substituted the letter Y because it looked somewhat similar in handwriting. So ye old is literally just a historical typo for the letter thorn. It was always meant to be pronounced the. That is such a great aha moment for how the clunky mechanics of early writing actually shaped how we view language today. All right, Section 5, the fall of Old English. So you might be wondering, is this complex, highly inflected runic language still spoken somewhere today? The answer is a hard no. The absolute death knell for the Old English era rang in the year 1066. You've probably heard of it, the year of the Norman conquest. French-speaking Normans crossed the Channel, took over the country, and boom, immediately replaced Old English with Anglo-Norman French among the ruling upper classes. For several centuries, English was basically demoted. It became the language of the commoners. But here's the thing. English didn't die. It adapted. It was heavily influenced by French and Old Norse. It shed its complex inflections, and it absorbed thousands of new words. This massive transformation is what forced the language to evolve into what scholars call Middle English. And finally, Section 6, words we still use. Now, despite this massive French invasion of the language, Old English never truly died out completely. Scholars estimate that a massive 85% of the Old English vocabulary was completely lost to time, just gone. But we absolutely shouldn't let that fool us, because that tiny 15% sliver that actually survived the Norman conquest and evolved into modern English, it is incredibly important. That 15% is so crucial because those surviving words are our most basic everyday vocabulary, where it's like house, night, water, word, friend, king, day, love, and good. These are the literal foundational building blocks of our daily communication. When we speak from the heart or just talk about our immediate surroundings, we are almost exclusively using words that are over 1,000 years old. Sure, the French influence brought us the fancy language of government and high society, but our most fundamental, basic human experiences, those are still described using the language of the Anglo-Saxons. Ultimately, what the story of Old English shows us is that language is a living, breathing thing. It never stops changing, it adapts to invasions, new technology, and just the steady march of time. Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating final thought to ponder. If English could evolve from this completely unrecognizable, runic language into the modern words we're speaking right now, how alien will our English look to the people of the year 3026?